So the pilot searching for Teresa's car, he didn't even look at Stephen Avery's place first. Why the hell not? Let's get into it. Hey there, it's Christine. Welcome back to Beach House 34. This is episode 7 of the Stephen Avery Trial. If you're just jumping in here, do yourself a favor and at least go back to episode 6. It sets this up much better. I'll link to it in the show's description. I also want to make a note that if you are watching or if you haven't yet seen it on YouTube, I do show all of the exhibits that I have access to. The channel is youtube.com/beachhouse34. If you're a Patreon member, you get early access to all of these episodes, the full uncensored video along with the exhibits for just $5 a month. And you get this access a full week before the general public. For more information, just go to patreon.com/beachhouse34. Last time, in the last episode, we heard from Dawn Pliska. She's the receptionist at Auto Trader who booked Teresa's appointment at Avery's salvage yard that day. She laid out the timeline, a same-day booking. Teresa calls at 2:27 p.m. saying she's on her way there, and then nothing. The big thing that the defense wanted the jury to hear was that Teresa could have made other stops, these hustle shots that she did on the side for extra money. If she did that day, no one would have known because the paperwork never came back. Now, I'm curious whether or not she actually filled out the paperwork in order to fax it back, but that's, to my knowledge, has not been made public, or at least I haven't seen it or heard of it. So we're left with this big question mark. Did she ever leave the Avery salvage yard? Could someone else have crossed her path after that? The state wants you to believe, well, no, she was killed right there. Nothing happened afterwards. The defense says maybe. So in today's testimony, we start with Curtis Drumm, the pilot who actually searched for Teresa's car from the air. The court says, at this time, we are back on the record. Mr. Kratz, you may call your next witness. And Attorney Kratz, the prosecutor, says the state will call Curt Drumm, Your Honor. And the clerk says, raise your right hand. And then Curtis Drumm is called as a witness, asked to spell his name, etc. And the direct examination is begun by Attorney Kratz. Mr. Drumm, if you could just sit back just a little bit, you are a little too loud. Tell the jury, please, where you are from. I live in Manitowoc. And were you asked on the 4th of November of 2005 to assist law enforcement officers in search efforts for Teresa Halbach? Yes, I was. And what were you asked to help with? At that point, I didn't know the name or anything else, just that I was asked to help search for a missing person. Sometime on the 4th, then, of November, Mr. Drumm, did you assist law enforcement? Yes, we went up that afternoon for about 2.5 hours. You probably might want to tell the jury what you mean by we went up. I'm sorry, they had called and asked if we had an aircraft available. I operate the pilot services at the Manitowoc Airport, and our run was called the Fix Base Operator. We rent airplanes, provide flight instruction, things like that. The sheriff's department called and noted that they had a missing person and would we have an airplane and pilot available to go up and search several locations that they thought she might have been at. And I said yes, and we set up a time. They came out in the afternoon. We went up for about 2.5 hours, starting around 1:30, 2 o'clock, and flew until sometime around 5 o'clock. Went to 2 different locations in the Manitowoc County area, and then followed a path that took us up toward Green Bay, and then back down toward this area here where the home was, and then back over to the Manitowoc area. One of the first witnesses that answered all my questions before I even asked them. So, I'm sorry, I didn't know what order you wanted it. Trust me, it's pleasant this way, Mr. Drumm. I'm going to have to go back, though. The investigators that you went up with, did those include Sheriff Jerry Poggle from the Calumet County Sheriff's Department, as well as investigator Wendy Baldwin from the Sheriff's Department? Yes, sir. Were you told where to fly? In other words, were you told what locations they were interested in? They gave me, I think, some latitude, longitudes, which I programmed into a GPS. And of course, I knew nothing of the nature of the investigation. They just told me to go there, that they were looking for a possible car or a person. The first location was relatively near the airport. Am I getting ahead of myself? No, you're doing great. Why don't you tell us that first location? By the way, do you know whose home or whose residence or where that was located? They did not tell me no. It was the vicinity of Highway 310 and Q, I believe, about a mile and a half from the airport. We circled over that property and a radius of a couple miles around that area. Let me stop you there, Mr. Drumm. The residence around Highway 310 and Q, was that the first location that they instructed you to look at? Yes, sir. Are you familiar, Mr. Drumm, with the Avery Auto Salvage property? I was not until following everything had happened. But are you now familiar? Oh, yes, sir. And was that the first property that they asked you to go search around? No, it was the second. All right. So Avery's wasn't even the first place that they asked you to look? No, sir. All right. After that first residence, then you were asked to search a second property. Is that right? That's affirmative. That ended up being the Avery property. We followed roads. Again, they weren't sure why she was missing, so we followed roads and the smaller county highways to see if she had maybe gone off the road or into a ditch or had an accident that wasn't reported or otherwise found. Eventually worked our way up to what's the Avery property. When you say that you were searching, what's all included in an aerial search or a search with an airplane? They were the investigators, so they knew what they were looking for. As a pilot, I'm more used to looking at things from the air. So they gave me a description of the vehicle we were looking for, the color and the make and model. And we tried to see if there was any place where that car might have been in a ditch or an area where it may have been involved in an accident, or if it had been hidden someplace or behind a garage or in front of some trees or whatever. From above, you have got a lot better perspective of areas, being able to look down through the trees and through different areas, so we tried to find the car. Mr. Drumm, then not just residences, but you also searched roadways and ditches. Roadways, ditches, area farms, behind barns, any place that, she may have gone either on purpose or otherwise. We just tried to identify any places we might assist in finding the car. There's an exhibit in front of you, exhibit number 25. I'm going to have the jury look at this at the same time you are. Why don't you tell us what this is? What are we looking at? It looks like the salvage yard. And again, does exhibit 25, at least from an aerial view, which are views that you are familiar with, does this look the same or similar as it did on or about the 4th of November of 2005? Yes, it does. Yeah, there were several adjacent gravel pits to it, forest areas, farm areas. This appears to be the private property we looked at. Okay. Now, I assume, Mr. Drumm, that as we zoom in a little bit on this photograph, is it fair that it would be difficult to pick out a specific car in that location? We tried to fly over different aisles, and the size of the yard was so expansive and so many vehicles there. It was difficult, really, to pick out anything of detail. We were at about 500 feet, which is the FAA minimum for a flight over unpopulated areas. But even from 500 feet, it's tough to pick out a specific car. All right. Did you find any vehicle that looked like a blue or teal or greenish Toyota RAV4? Not that I'm aware of. If the investigators saw something, they didn't tell me. After the Avery property was searched, you said that you went someplace else. Could you describe that? They had indicated that she might have had some friends up in Green Bay that she might have been meeting with. And we followed primarily the county roads east of I-43 because that's where she would have been coming from. From this, if this had been her last stop. And we worked our way up toward Green Bay, again, looking to see if there was anything in ditches or side roads or anything. I questioned why. They said, well, maybe she had an accident or something hadn't been reported or was at the side of the road. So we followed the roads all the way up almost to Green Bay then turned around and followed the roads on the west side back toward her residence. And again, searching all the side roads and looking for anything that might have been out of the ordinary. So you were told that the area on or adjacent to the Hallbach, that is, the Teresa Hallbach residence, was also searched. Is that right? Yes, we spent a fair amount of time in that vicinity, again, looking to see if the car was around, if we could find anything that might help them find the girl. Was there also another property, that is, another residence in Calumet County that you were asked to search around? Do you remember? We may have gone, they may have, we flew over a lot of areas. We flew over a lot of areas. Basically, I just flew the airplane and the investigators asked me to go left or go right to different areas. I didn't question where exactly they were looking, but we spent a fair amount of time in this area looking at different areas, just points of interest of theirs. And to get right to the question, Mr. Drumm, at least based upon what the investigators told you, was the Avery salvage property the focal point or the only place that you were looking for Teresa's car? No, we spent substantial time looking at other locations. Attorney Kratz then says, I would move the admission of Exhibit 25. That's all the questions I have. Attorney Strang says no objection, and the court says, very well, the exhibit is admitted. Mr. Strang. And then Stephen's attorneys begin their cross-examination. Good afternoon, Mr. Drumm. Hi. Do you know now what the first place was that you flew over near the intersection of 310 and Q? They mentioned a name, and I don't really recall. They just said that these were locations where she had appointments. Okay, there was a residence. There was a residence and several outbuildings, several trees. Rural sort of residences? Pardon me? Rural sort of residences? Yes. Okay. So you went there, then you flew essentially north to the Mishicot area, to the Avery property? Correct. From there, continued north to the Green Bay area? Correct. We didn't do the city of Green Bay. We got to the southern outskirts. Following, 42 or 57? We basically followed the east side of I-43. Okay. Back down along the lakeshore? No, we came back down on the west side of I-43, back toward Chilton? Toward Chilton. Past Hilbert, St. John? Again, kind of zigzagged around from an airplane at 500 to 1,000 feet, clear day. You have pretty good visibility. This was on November 4th? Yes, correct. The plane wasn't equipped with aerial photography equipment? No, sir. And obviously you were piloting the plane? Yes. So someone else in the plane was taking photos? I believe one of the investigators was taking pictures. I mean, not you? No. And were these just sort of regular snapshot kind of cameras out the window as you banked? Yes. Any videotaping going on November 4th? I'm sorry, I don't recall that. Fair enough. I was looking out the front window. I understand that. And then as you flew back from Chilton, Hilbert, and the area north of here back to Manitowoc, was it back to the Avery Auto Salvage or back to the airport? Back to the airport. Okay. Now the photograph that we have up here is Exhibit 25. As it is set up now, that's a view from substantially above 500 feet above ground level. True? From that perspective, we would have been, that looks like higher than 500 feet. 1,500 feet above ground level, probably something like that. It depends on the angle of the lens you use. That could have been much lower if you use a wide enough lens to make it look like that. It's hard to tell. I'm just looking at the size of the buildings and the size of the cars. You've been flying for how long? 15, 20 years. Okay. Familiar with something called pattern altitude? Yes. Ordinarily, that's 1,000 feet above ground level. Correct. Okay. Pattern meaning when you are in a pattern over the airport? Right. You have done a lot of flying in the pattern, as they say, at 1,000 feet above ground level? Correct. You are familiar with the general view of terrain at approximately that altitude? Correct. This looks a little bit higher than that. If you were at 1,000 looking with the naked eye, that's higher. Okay. Now, maybe with Mr. Kratz's help, we can zoom in just a little bit. And Attorney Kratz says, "Where would you like me to zoom in?" And Attorney Strang says, "Let's go up to the pond. Can we go to a little further, or do we lose resolution? Okay, let's work with that." And then Attorney Strang continues, "Just give us a perspective of about 500 feet above ground level." That's approximately 500. Okay. Which is considered the minimum safe altitude for flying over sparsely populated areas. Correct. Now, if if I realize the window is in the photograph, but this area here, can you see me and see it? Yes. Why don't you tell our jurors what you recall this area as being if you do? I don't exactly recall if that's a gravel pit area. There were a lot of gravel pit areas, either active or abandoned. I don't recall what that area was. Just for orientation, though, you recall this as being south. That is the right edge of this photo as being south? I believe so. Okay. What you do remember is that there were a lot of gravel pits around the Avery Auto Salvage. That's correct. Or quarries. Correct. Okay. And whether that's one of them or not, you just don't remember? Again, I don't know what I was looking for, so other than a car. You went up again on November 5th, or no, on Saturday, November 5th, or no, not with law enforcement. Not with law enforcement? No, I made other flights subsequent once it became apparent what was going on, but not with any law enforcement. With whom did you make other flights over the Avery Auto Salvage property? I don't recall. But I mean, just as a matter of interest, while the search for Teresa Halbach was going on, the area north of the airport in that vicinity is a regular practice area we use with students. It's off the airways. It's not near the airport. It's an area we use for practicing flying over unpopulated areas. Okay. So that wouldn't be in the path of going to some place on a training flight. And in other words, the flight you did later, to the extent that they took you over the Avery Auto Salvage, were unrelated to the search for Teresa Halbach? Right. They had nothing to do with it. How much time did you spend in the general vicinity of the Avery Auto Salvage yard? Oh, I would say maybe 15 minutes, 20 minutes. How much time, roughly, over the first residence, Highway 310 and Highway Q? 5 or 10? And mostly, then, transit time, other than sometimes circling over Hilbert, St. John's, that area? Correct. And when we did our transit, they weren't straight lines necessarily. We flew around again, surveying the side roads, trying to see if we could see anything. That's all I have. Oh, I'm sorry. Just a moment. That's it. Thank you. The court then says, "Mr. Kratz, any redirect?" And Attorney Kratz says, "No, Judge, thank you." The court says, "Very well. The witness is excused." So this witness leaves, and then another witness is called. Attorney Kratz says, "Steve Schmitz, please." And the court says, again, "Please raise your right hand," and he's called as a witness. The direct examination is begun by Attorney Kratz. "Mr. Schmitz, where are you from, sir?" "New Holstein, Wisconsin." "I'm going to direct your attention to the 31st of October, 2005. Ask if you remember that day?" "Yes, I do." "And did you make any contact that day with a young woman that you later learned was Teresa Halbach?" "Yes, I did." "Tell the jury, please, how it was that you made contact with Miss Halbach." "I had a car for sale. She contacted me that day. She was going to be here about 1:30. She showed up. She did a photograph of my car. I gave her a check. She gave me a receipt with a bag with information in it, and then she left. I'm going to show you what's been received as exhibit number 5. Ask you if you can direct your attention to the large screen. Is this the woman that you made contact with the afternoon of the 31st? Yes, it is. Mr. Schmitz, how long was it that this transaction occurred? In other words, how long did it take for Miss Halbach to take the photographs, get paid, give you the information, and be on her way. 10 to 15 minutes max. Where did this transaction take place? In my driveway. In New Holstein? Yeah. You're quite sure it was around 1:30 p.m.? Yes, I am. The vehicle that's depicted here in exhibit number 5, the bluish green SUV, was that the vehicle that Miss Halbach was driving, if you remember? Yes. Can you tell the jury, please, how Miss Halbach was dressed that day, if you remember? She had blue jeans on, a button-up white blouse, and a spring jacket, waist length. I believe it was blue in color. I don't expect you to know this, Mr. Schmitz, but we'll ask it anyway. Do you know what brand of blue jeans she was wearing? No. How long did you say the jacket was that she had on? I would say about waist length. It was like a summer jacket. How was she paid, if you remember? I gave her a check. After Miss Halbach concluded her transaction with you, do you know which way she left, which way she drove? She headed north on Highway A. And for those of us not familiar with the New Holstein area, does going north on Highway A intersect with any large roads that we would know? It was formerly Highway 149. Now I believe it's HH. What's north of that is what I'm asking. 151 if you keep going north. 151 would be the main road or the main trunk road between would be Chilton and the Calumet County area and Manitowoc. Is that right? Yes. Miss Halbach appear upset to you when you met with her? No, very friendly and very polite. The information or the papers that she left with you, do you recall those? Can you describe them? Yeah, one was a for sale sign. There was a book that was the Auto Trader. And then there was like a contract if you were to sell your vehicle, how to fill it out properly, like a sales receipt. So a receipt and an Auto Trader magazine. Is that right? Right. Do you recall what this receipt looked like? It was a larger white thing, probably 6 by 8 square, just a common receipt. Do you know what it was called? You didn't keep it, did you? No. I think that's all I have of Mr. Schmitz. Thank you, Judge. The court says Mr. Strang, and the cross-examination begins. Mr. Schmitz, just generally, where is New Holstein in relation to, let's say, the city of Manitowoc? Oh, quite a ways away. I would say probably 35 miles. Is it west, southwest? West, yeah, southwest. That is, New Holstein is west and a little south of Manitowoc. I'm actually south of New Holstein. Okay, fair enough. The car you had was at your house, as you said? Yes. But you owned that jointly with another gentleman? Yes, I did. His name is Craig Sipple? Yes. Mr. Sipple is the one who actually called and made the appointment with Auto Trader? Yes. And gave your address, presumably, yes, as the place for the photo shoot? Right. The car is stored in my shed. In your shed? Yes. You may need to swing your mic a little closer to you or you a little closer to it. If you get too close, it gets too loud, a delicate balance. Mr. Sipple is a friend of yours? Yes. Do you know him well? Yes. He wasn't trying to lure a photographer to your house by using his name when he called Auto Trader asking for someone to come to your residence? No. Thanks. That's all I've got. And the court says, very well. Attorney Kratz then says, Judge, if I could ask one follow-up question? And the court says yes. And the redirect is done by Attorney Kratz. Mr. Schmitz, do you recall the date that law enforcement came and asked you questions regarding your contact with Miss Halbach? Like a day or so after, I'm not positive. They contacted me to make sure she was there, and I said, yes, she was. That's all I have. Thank you, sir. And the court says you are excused. And at this point, they call another witness. Attorney Kratz says state will call JoEllen Zipperer to the stand. And then the clerk swears her in, has her spell her last name, and then the direct examination is begun. Good afternoon, Mrs. Zipperer. The questions that I have for you relate to incidents that occurred on the 31st of October of last year, 2005. Let me first ask you, Mrs. Zipperer, where do you live? I'm going to redact the address, but it's on County Trunk B in Manitowoc. Is that residence near any intersections, any major roads? Near 310 and B. So your residence is near Highway 310. Is that right? Yes. Who do you live there with, Mrs. Zipperer? My husband and my daughter and my grandson. If we promise not to call you, Mrs. Zipperer, could you give us your home telephone number, please? And at this point, she recites her home phone. Thank you. On the 31st of October, 2005, do you remember having contact with a young lady at your residence? Yes, I do. First of all, could you tell the jury about what time you had contact with this young lady? Mid-afternoon. Do you know any closer time to that, anything more specific, or do you not recall? Not exactly. I think it was maybe around 3 o'clock. I'm not sure exactly. I was outside working, so do you know for sure, or are you guessing, Mrs. Zipperer? I'm just estimating that it was around mid-afternoon. Okay. Could you tell me what this young lady looked like? She was shorter than I am. She was slender, petite, young. Did you have any conversation with this young lady? Yes, I did. Do you know why she was there, or can you tell the jury why she was there? She was taking a picture of a car that we had for sale. Did this young lady identify herself? Did she tell you what her name was? I don't remember that she told me her name. After watching the news, or a couple days after having contact with this young woman, did you find out or figure out who it was that was at your residence? Yes. And do you remember who that was? Yes. Who was that? It was Teresa Halbach. I show you a picture which has been received as exhibit number 5, just so that we're all sure. If you look to your right, is that the young lady that was at your residence on the 31st? Yes, it was. Mrs. Zipperer, can you tell the jury, if you remember, what this young lady was wearing? She was wearing a dark jacket, waist length. I think she had jeans, and she had brown hiking boots. Hiking shoes, not boots. They were shoes. All right. When you had contact with this young lady, how long was it that you spoke with her? About 15 minutes she was there. After taking the pictures, or after finishing her business there, can you tell me what she did? She came to talk to me with some papers. She told me that I should give them to my husband and he should look them over and decide if he wanted to go ahead and put the car in the magazine. And if he did, the picture would be already taken, and then all he had to do was call her the next day or whenever he decided to put it in the paper, the magazine. Mrs. Zipperer, I have handed you what's been marked for identification as exhibit number 26. It's a bag full of materials. Do you recognize that bag? Yes. And do you recognize the materials or the papers that are inside of it? Yes. Were those the materials or the papers that Teresa Halbach left for you or gave to you after you had your transaction with her? Yes. You can just kind of pick one of those things up. First of all, let's start with the Auto Trader magazine. Is there a magazine in there? Is that right? Mm-hmm. Would you show that to the jury, please? And she shows the jury. Is there something in those papers called a bill of sale? Yes. Would you show that to the jury, please? And she shows this to the jury. And is there also a for sale sign in there? Yes. Could you show that to us, please? And she shows the jury. Exhibit number 27 is then marked for identification. You can put them back in the bag, if you will. I have now given you what's been marked as exhibit number 27. It's a photograph, but it may be a little easier for the jury to see what we're talking about. Can you tell us what exhibit 27 is, please? I'm not sure what this is. You don't know what that's a photograph of? Attorney Strang then says, I don't have any quarrel that it's a photograph of the items in exhibit 26. And then Attorney Kratz continues. You were just holding those items, weren't you, in exhibit 26? Isn't this a picture of the things that are in exhibit 26? Oh, yes. A for sale sign, a bill of sale, and an Auto Trader magazine? Yes. Attorney Kratz then says, thank you, counsel. And then he continues, Mrs. Zipperer, After speaking with this young woman, did she tell you where she was going, where she was heading next? No, she didn't. How long was she there? About 15 minutes. This young lady seem upset to you? No. How was her demeanor? In other words, how did she act towards you? She was very nice. She was pleasant and friendly. She smiled. A couple things we talked about. She smiled. Now, prior to her arrival, Mrs. Zipperer, do you recall receiving a phone call from this young lady? That day? Yes. She left a message that she was having trouble finding our house, but I was outside, so I didn't hear it until later after she was gone. But she found the place. She just told me that she was having trouble finding it. And then she asked me if that was the right house. I said yes. And she asked me if it was okay if we took a picture of the car. And then I showed her how to get to it. And then she went by herself to take the picture. When she told you that she found the place, or when she indicated that she had been lost before she got there, did she indicate how long she was looking for your residence or how long she had called you before she got there? Anything like that? No, she didn't. I'm going to interrupt. I'm curious, though, if she did leave a message, there's got to be a timestamp on that message, right? Let's go back to the testimony. Now, was this a vehicle that you were selling or somebody else? My grandson was selling it. So you didn't have anything to do with the sale of this car. Is that right? No. You were just the one that spoke with Miss Hallbach. Is that right? Yes. Did you see her leave? No, I did not see her leave. Mrs. Zipperer, after your brief contact with Miss Hallbach, did you have any further discussion with her, or did you ever talk to this young lady again? No, I did not. I think that's all I have then, Judge. I would move 26 and 27 at this time. The court says, any objection? Attorney Strang says, no objection, Your Honor. And the court says 26 and 27 are admitted. Mr. Strang. And then Attorney Strang begins his cross-examination. Thank you. Mrs. Zipperer, I have several questions for you too. You were out working in the yard, so you weren't clear on the passage of time that afternoon, as I understood you? When she came? Right. Not exactly, no. I was outside and it was estimated mid-afternoon. Sure. And by mid-afternoon, possibly it could have been as early as, say, 2:30 or something like that. It could have been. She had a time that she was trying to find our house on our answering machine. Right. But you heard that message only later, correct? Right. I'm sorry, this is a strange place. Nods of heads don't work as well here as they do outside. So you didn't hear the message until sometime later after she left? In the evening, I heard it. So I guess mid-afternoon could have been 2:30, possibly. Could have been. Could have been 3 o'clock. Could have been. Could have been 3:30 or a little after that, something like that. But sometime in the middle of the afternoon? Yes. That's the best you can do for us today? Yes. Okay, fair enough. And what sort of yard work was keeping you busy that afternoon? I was outside raking. So it's the kind of thing where either you weren't wearing a watch or you weren't worrying about the time. No, I don't wear a watch. Now, your address is actually on County Highway B? Right. County Road B. Okay. Mr. Kratz may have asked you this, and I was jotting a note and maybe didn't hear it. But if you continue going north on County Road B, do you come to Highway 147? Right? Not too far away, right? It's about 10 minutes from our house to the north of B, right? Yes. And if you go left on 147 before too long, do you come to the Avery Auto Salvage on your left? I don't know where that is. I was never there. Okay. All right. Are you at County Road B and Highway 147? Is that roughly the Mishicot area? Right. And you are pretty much due north of the city of Manitowoc? Right. All right. Now, you didn't see from which direction this young woman came to your house? No, I didn't. You didn't see which direction she left your house from? I did not. Okay. You came in for supper time? I did. Yes. Back to the house? Yes. And your husband, George, came home? Yes. Your grandson, this was his car? Yes. His name is Jason? Yes. He was home too? I'm not sure when he came home. Sometime that evening, or in any event, he stays with you? Yes. Okay. Were you were you there nearby on the evening of November 3rd, 3 days after this, Thursday, November 3rd, sometime shortly after supper, when your husband, George, got a telephone call from a sheriff's detective? I could have been. Do you remember that call? I think so. Actually, and then later on in the evening, pretty late, about 9:40 at night, a second call came in from a sheriff's detective? Yes. Someone in Calumet County both times? Do you remember that? I don't remember which one it was. But George was on the phone both times? Yes. And the first one, do you remember George raising his voice and getting angry? At the first one? Yes. He could have. When you say he could have, I'm wondering whether you remember that or that just sounds like something George might do on a bad day. Yes, he does raise his voice sometimes. Do you remember that occasion when the sheriff's detective called from Calumet and George raised his voice on the phone? Attorney Kratz then says, Judge, I'm sorry. I didn't know that Mrs. Zipperer was involved in this call. Did she testify that she knew who was on the phone? Attorney Strang then says, yes. And the court says, I believe she did. And Attorney Strang says, right. And the questioning continues. And Mrs. Zipperer, you weren't on the phone yourself? No. But you were near George on his end. I mean, you were in the room or near George while he was on the phone? I could have been in the house. I don't remember exactly which call. I don't always listen to what he talks to. Mm-hmm. But do you remember a time when there was a great deal of news about Teresa Halbach being missing? Yes. All right. So this would have been that very night that it first made the news, 3 days after she was to your home that Thursday. Do you have that? Yes. Evening in mind? Yes. And I take it it's not often that a detective calls from the sheriff's department to your home? No. Do you remember hearing your husband, George, after he raised his voice into the telephone, threatening that he was going to call his attorney? Attorney Kratz then says, I'm going to object. This is clearly hearsay. The court says, Mr. Strang. Attorney Strang then says, I'm not offering it for the truth. I'm offering it for the fact that it was said. And the court says, I'm not sure I discern the difference. You're offering it because of the fact that it was said. Attorney Strang then says, yeah, the verbal facts. In fact, I intend to show these were not the truth. Were not being offered for the truth. The court says, well, let's step back a second. Foundationally, I know the witness testified about being aware of some calls, but I'm not sure if I'm tracking that she remembers a specific caller being there. So why don't you step back? Attorney Strang says, sure, that's fair enough. And then the questioning continues. And I understand this is the better part of a year and a half ago. But do you remember your husband receiving a call on Thursday evening, November 3rd, 2005, which was the night that the news first reported Teresa Halbach missing? I don't remember a specific date. No. Do you remember the phone call that I'm describing? I remember him talking to someone, but I don't know when. Okay. I don't know if I know who he was talking to. Okay. And I'm not asking for the name of the other person. I understand you weren't on the phone. But this was the night that he would have received 2 phone calls, 2 separate calls from an investigator. Attorney Kratz then says, Judge, I'm going to object. I want to be heard outside the presence of the jury. Counsel is testifying. And the court says, all right, we'll excuse the jury for a few minutes. And at this point, the jury leaves. And then the conversation continues. And the court says, all right, Mr. Kratz. And Attorney Kratz says, thank you, Judge. This is clearly a hearsay. And counsel interjecting the facts in front of this jury, making comments like this, is the night that the 2 investigators called you, not only calls for a hearsay response, but Mr. Strang is offering the testimony in lieu of this witness. I don't see any exception to the hearsay rule. It is for the truth of the matter asserted. Even if Mr. Strang's relevancy, if there is any, is the fact that an investigator called, suggesting the fact that it was an investigator on the phone, elicits that hearsay response. It's improper, Judge. And then the court says, Mr. Strang. And Attorney Strang says, why don't we excuse the witness so that we're not tainting her testimony by my response? The court says, all right, Mrs. Zipperer, can you step out in the hall for a minute? And the witness leaves the courtroom. Then the court continues, Mr. Strang. And he says, thank you. First of all, I am leading the witness. This being cross-examination, I'm suggesting to her the answer. The basis, a good faith basis for the questions is indisputable. I have one report from Corporal Lemieux of the Calumet County Sheriff's Department documenting her phone call. She doesn't give a time of the actual call. She only tells us that about 5 o'clock on Thursday, November 3rd, 2005, is when she begins working on the missing person investigation, and then writes a report that sort of logs her activities that evening. One of them being a call with Mr. Zipperer in which he becomes belligerent on the telephone. And then I have the reports of investigator John Dietering of the Calumet County Sheriff's Department documenting his call later that same evening. He places the call at approximately 9:40 p.m. on Thursday, November 3rd, 2005, and describes verbatim. His report says George was extremely belligerent initially and goes on from there. I don't intend to offer Mr. Zipperer's comments for their truth. Indeed, the intent is to show that Mr. Zipperer told first Corporal Lemieux and then Investigator Dietering a series of lies about his own activities, about Jason's activities, about whether the auto trader photographer was a trespasser on the property, threatened to have the dog eat anyone who would come on the property, wanting Teresa Halbach arrested, even after being told that she was a missing person, denying that he had contacted Auto Trader or arranged for photographs of the car. So what I'm interested in is eliciting, not for the truth, but as relevant verbal acts, these statements that I believe she would have overheard. The court then says, Mr. Kratz. And he says, Judge, the fact that first of all, the fact that Mr. Strang has to ask this witness who she was talking to, that alone calls for a hearsay response. So there isn't any foundation. But the relevance, even if there was a hearsay exception, to the fact that Mr. Zipperer flies off the handle or indicates that Miss Halbach was a trespasser or some other reason, I fail to see. And for both of those reasons, would ask that this question be excluded. Attorney Strang then says, now, she herself meets with Investigator Dietering later that evening at what he marks as 9:53 p.m. So he physically then comes to the residence. Investigator Dietering does. He talks with her as well as her husband. So again, that's why I believe she's there. And that's the background. The court says, I think I understand your objection to the hearsay exception being that you are not offering the statements for the truth of the matter asserted. But what's the relevance? And Attorney Strang says the issue here is whether the people investigating Teresa's death investigated without bias, investigated objectively, sort of followed the evidence where it led them. When somebody who was essentially evenly placed with Mr. Avery, that is both known to be appointments on the afternoon that Teresa Halbach is last seen, when that person becomes belligerent and uncooperative with the police, continues to be bellicose and uncooperative when told that this is a missing person and that the police need help, and then tells the police a series, not one, not two, but a whole series of lies, it's relevant to whether the police then pursued that and said, gosh, we have somebody who would have been one of the last people to see her, and he's lying to us about just about everything that's coming out of his mouth. He is hostile, he is uncooperative, perhaps he is worthy of some further investigation. I intend to show later that, in fact, Mr. Zipperer got little or no further investigation. The court says, Mr. Kratz, and Attorney Kratz says he can ask the police that, Judge. It shouldn't come in through Mrs. Zipperer or call George Zipperer. And Attorney Strang says, I don't know that I need to call witnesses to do this. Now, if he would rather I ask the police, and obviously if Mrs. Zipperer really does not remember her husband's end of the conversation, then I will do it with Investigator Dietering. I mean, I'm not. And the court says, is the investigator going to be testifying for the state? Attorney Kratz says he's right outside the door, Judge. He's probably going to be my next witness with this line of questioning. And the court says, Given how little the witness appears to remember about the conversation, I'm not sure that it's necessary for the court to rule on the objection. And if we got other people here who are firsthand, maybe Mr. Strang, if they say something that you feel this witness somehow might be in a position to clear up, you can consider bringing her back. But I don't see at this stage, based on what I have heard so far, that she remembers enough about it to offer anything probative. Attorney Strang then says, and I will understand completely and entirely, except Mr. Kratz's polite refusal to answer this question. But I will ask. I will put it to the court, and the court can require Mr. Kratz, if he wishes, whether the state expects to call Corporal Lemieux. And Attorney Kratz says, I don't know. Mrs. Zipperer is not done, and I have some questions as well. So the court then says, is Mr. Zipperer scheduled to be testifying? Attorney Kratz says, he's on the witness list. I don't intend to call him. It would be cumulative for what Mrs. Zipperer is saying. And the court says, well, at any rate, at this stage, Mrs. Zipperer doesn't seem to remember enough about the conversation. I think it's time to move on. Attorney Strang then says, and that's fair. And I understand I can do this through Investigator Dietering. I didn't have anything else for Mrs. Zipperer, so I can pass this back to redirect when the jury, and the court says, very well. Attorney Strang then continues, is called back. And the court says, Mr. Kratz, you do have a few questions? Attorney Kratz says, just since Mr. Strang brought up her memory about the time, she does have a written statement about that. And the court says, all right, we'll bring the jury back in. We can bring the witness back in. Mr. Strang, I will ask you, for the record, when the jury comes back in, if you have any further questions. And Attorney Strang says, sure. The jury is then brought back into the room, and the court says, you may be seated. Mr. Strang, do you have any further questions for this witness? And Attorney Strang says, I do not have any further questions on cross-examination. Thank you, Your Honor. The court says, Mr. Kratz. And Kratz says, just briefly. And then he begins his redirect. Mrs. Zipperer, after Teresa Hallback went missing, do you recall being interviewed yourself by an investigator with the Calumet County Sheriff's Department whose name was John Dietering? I don't remember his name, but I was interviewed. A bald fellow remember being interviewed by? I can't remember if he was bald. All right. Mr. Strang asked you if today you recall the approximate time that Teresa was at your residence. And I believe with Mr. Strang, you indicated that it was sometime in the afternoon, sometime in the later afternoon. Is that what you told him today? Mid-afternoon. Do you recall providing Investigator Dietering with a written statement wherein you indicated the time that Teresa was out to your property? I remember that day, yes. Do you remember what you wrote in that statement? Not everything. If I showed you that statement, would that help refresh your memory about the time that she was there? Right. I think I have to have my other glasses, though. I'm sorry. Julie has my reading glasses. And Attorney Kratz says, we'll get those. And then the reading glasses are delivered. And the witness says, I'm sorry. The questions are continued. Now, Mrs. Zipperer, I don't want you to say anything, but I want you to just look at your written statement. That's exhibit number 28 that's been put in front of you. I want you to just read it to yourself. Mrs. Zipperer, my associate is going to take that exhibit from you, going to take that away from you. And now I'm going to ask you if after reading that statement, if that refreshes your recollection about when Teresa was out to visit you that day. Yes, it does. And what time then was she out to see you that day? Between 2 and 2:30. That's all I've got, Judge. Thank you. And the court says, Mr. Strang, anything on Recross? And Attorney Strang says, I do. And the Recross is begun. The piece of paper that the prosecution just showed you, that actually was something written by the police officer, correct? Right. I just told him and he wrote it down. He wrote it down and then you signed it at the bottom? Yes. And you wrote the date on it? Yes. And that was, 6 days or so after the young woman had come to your house? I don't remember the date that was on there. Okay. It says November 6th. You don't have any reason to doubt that, do you? No. Okay. And when the police officer asked you about time, were you doing what you were doing today, which is giving your best estimate of when this young woman showed up while you were raking leaves in the yard? No, that was right because I just couldn't remember right today what exactly time it was. Okay. But as I understood, you don't wear a watch. No, I don't. You weren't wearing a watch on Halloween 2005? No. You were out in the yard raking leaves? Right. And at that time, do you remember whether he suggested 2 to 2:30, or do you know why he wrote that down? That's what I thought it was on that day. And as you sit here today, is that your best recollection or mid-afternoon? What was on the paper 2 to 2:30? Okay. You are going to go with the paper? Right. Okay. Thank you. Attorney Kratz then says thank you. And the court says, all right, Mrs. Zipperer, you are excused. And Attorney Kratz says, may we approach, Judge? And the court says yes. And at this point, a sidebar is taken, which is not included in the transcripts. So that's where we're going to leave it for today. Let's kind of step back and go over what we heard. Okay, we just heard how the pilot flew around looking for Teresa's car, and Avery's salvage yard wasn't even the first place that they went to. They circled other properties, these ditches and some back roads. And what does this tell you? That law enforcement didn't lock in on Avery immediately, well, at least from the pilot perspective. But then you kind of have to wonder, why were they doing this search from the air in the first place? I can understand, right, the ditches and the back roads, and just because it's a very rural area, right? But once they get to the Avery property, it is a salvage yard. There are like 4,000 cars there. Are you really going to spot a single blue-green RAV4 wedged between, two other vehicles that might look similar, might look older, might look whatever, just in this yard of 4,000 vehicles? And then we've got these customers, right? Steve Schmitz and JoEllen Zipperer. Well, technically, JoEllen wasn't an actual customer, but they both interacted with Teresa that afternoon. They each put her alive and working at her job. She was being very professional and polite. She was driving her RAV4. There's still this dead zone, right? We know where she was at certain times, but do we really know, where she went next? Speaking of the Zipperers, you might be wondering, as I did, why didn't George Zipperer testify? Maybe he will later. I don't know. Like I said, I am reading these right along with you. This is the first time I've read through them. I haven't even looked ahead as to who's going to be testifying, except for the next episode. But from what we've learned with JoEllen on the stand, George is a bit on the touchy side, right? It sounds like he takes serious issues with people he doesn't know being on his property, like overly so. Kind of makes you wonder what he's hiding, though, doesn't it? I mean, if somebody's that worried about some stranger being at their property, why are your panties all in a bunch about it? If he ever does take the stand, I wouldn't be surprised if he's just as belligerent there too, just not respecting the whole process. And to be honest, that might be kind of fun. Is fun the right word? That might be kind of interesting, maybe very tea-worthy, right? If he does take the stand. But did you ever get the impression that the defense was actually pointing the finger at George? I sure did. So far, the case has been pretty basic. I mean, people who'd seen Teresa that day, what they did to search for her, how they searched for her. But here's where it starts to get more interesting. The next episode will be a guy by the name of Ryan Hilligus, who was Teresa's ex-boyfriend. He was out there helping with the search, as were plenty of other people, right? I can't help but think of that old saying, or the saying around homicide investigations, that it goes something like, sometimes the person who helps you look knows exactly where the body is, especially if you follow true crime, right? That those that are guilty often keep themselves very close to the case. They show up for searches. They light candles at vigils. It's a tactic. If they stay close, they stay ahead of what's being found. And once they know what's being found, they can kind of help steer you in a different direction. Her ex takes the stand in the next episode, and this time we're going to be doing something different. If you watched the documentary on Netflix, especially Making a Murderer Part 2, you know that a very famous attorney, Kathleen Zellner, took over as Stephen's post-conviction defense attorney. She claims that she can prove he was framed, and she went to great lengths to test and retest evidence, of course, when the state would actually give her the evidence to test, talk to people that were involved. She even gave names of other suspects, and she, throughout her career, has exonerated more than 20 people because she does this. I'm, during the next reading, going to add in some of her public filings about some of these people who are taking the stand, because I think that you will be really surprised, probably even shocked. Because the thing is that Kathleen Zellner, her documents, I suppose I could read through the whole thing, but it's not really a trial per se. It's just a filing that shows, hey, this is what we tested, this is what we did, this is what we found. And yeah, I might do that later on. But while this is going on, while we're at the Stephen Avery trial and we're hearing all of this and we have these witnesses come up on the stand, after they testify, I will then add what Zellner found out about that information, because I think you're going to find it super, super interesting, and it will probably piss a lot of people off. And if I have time, I'm also going to do Pam Sturm. I think she's up next after Ryan Hilligus. She's actually the woman, she is Teresa's distant cousin who happened to find the RAV4 on the Avery salvage yard in less than 30 minutes. It was, how did she do that? So stick around. If you want to view all of the exhibits that I show, you know where to find me. I'm at youtube.com/beachhouse34. If you would rather watch this podcast, or at least see the images of the podcast that I'm speaking of, or you can go to patreon.com/beachhouse34, where I will have the same videos, but they will be the uncensored ones, because sometimes YouTube doesn't want you to show certain things, and so I can't, and so I'll put those at Patreon. And again, Patreon, you guys get everything a week sooner than people on YouTube. So I will see you all next time when we hear from Teresa's ex-boyfriend. Bye for now.